My name is Michelle Iannello. I'm the program coordinator for school counseling here at Greenwich High School, and I'm super excited to welcome all of you this evening to what's going to be an incredibly informative evening from some incredible admissions officers who are giving us their time to help support our students in our community. So thank you all very much for coming and sharing your knowledge with our community. We very much appreciate it. I'm going to turn this over to Allison now, who will get started with the introduction.
Great, thank you, Michelle, and good evening, Greenwich High School students and parents. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight for our annual college admissions panel. I personally have been looking forward to this panel since early September when we had it scheduled. We're very honored to have a wonderful group of people here with us tonight who have just such great experience and depth of knowledge that I'm confident we'll all appreciate and learn from tonight. While the content of tonight is mainly for juniors and sophomores, I certainly hope that seniors and freshmen will find some of the discussion helpful as well. So each of the presenters will take about 5 to 10 minutes or so on a specific topic, and then we will have plenty of time for Q&A and some discussion. So I'd like to start by introducing the panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Lynn Verrecchia from College of the Holy Cross. Lynn is going to talk to us tonight about the role of the parent in the admissions process. And then we have Erica Sanders from Michigan, and Erica is going to speak to us about the factors considered in the admissions process, like what factors are most important. And then we have Vern from UConn, and Vern's going to give us some of his tips on shaping our college list. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lynn if you want to get us started.
Thanks so much, Allison. So I really appreciate being here today, and I was really happy to be asked to speak on this topic in particular because I think it's really important and also very complex. I'm the parent of 2 middle schoolers, so though I've worked in college admission for 25 years, and I'm about to offer a lot of opinions about the role of parents in the admission process, I haven't yet played that role myself. So I do hope that when my time comes, I'll still agree with at least 75% of the advice that I'm bold enough to offer. I'm going to use the term parents broadly, knowing that step-parents, guardians, perhaps grandparents, older siblings can fill a similar role. And that role is a supporting one. And I'll say like lead supporting role. So, when the curtain call comes, you get your bow just before the star of the show, who of course should and is your student. And I do want to say, I think that parents have gotten a bad rap, being described sometimes as helicopters or as bulldozers. And I'm not really a big fan of expecting parents to sacrifice and give endlessly for 16, 17, 18 years, and then just expecting them to fade into the background. Coincidentally, I'm currently on a recruiting trip in the area where I grew up. So I'm taking advantage of that opportunity, as many of us do, to stay with family this week. So I'm actually giving this presentation very poetically from my childhood bedroom. And I know that as soon as I go downstairs, my parents will say, "How did it go?" And so I believe that there is always a role for parents in their children's lives. And I know that teens are still kids, and there's many things that they need from their parents. And that goes beyond, can you give me a ride? Do you have any money in your wallet? And just finding that sweet spot for the role in this process can take some time. So I encourage you to think proofreader, not author, coach, not designated hitter. And, the application process, like all difficult things, offers a lot of opportunity to teach and learn valuable lessons. So I'd kind of like to approach this from the angle of thinking about the lessons I'd like to teach my kids before they're off to college and even beyond those years out in the world without my guidance on a daily basis. So as I think about it, discernment and reflection can really be built alongside the college list. Campus visits help students to learn to cut through the noise, to identify what's real and what's not, what it means to be a smart consumer. Writing, attention to detail, time management, are all exercised while completing the application and writing essays. And rather than thinking of the college essay as the end, I think we should think of it as a beginning. So students will be expected to produce much more difficult and complex work when they get to college than when they're completing their application. So there's really great practice to be earned there. Patience, comfort with ambiguity, the Jesuits would love that, can be practiced, while awaiting admission decisions. Resilience and good humor can be learned when students don't get what they want or they maybe have to change course. Engaging directly, not through a parent, but directly with an admission officer can offer student practice and interpersonal communications, phone and email etiquette. We certainly know that the entire process is an exercise in managing big and complex emotions. It's a chance to practice the art of students not comparing themselves so much to others, and especially not comparing themselves to what others post online. Sometimes the process offers lessons in reality or in perspective when a student who is very well deserving maybe doesn't get the result that they hoped for. Sometimes very difficult conversations do need to happen about affordability. And it's really best when parents can be upfront about what is and isn't possible for their family. It can be a chance to discuss cost, return on investment. What does it mean to take out a loan and pay it off? When it comes to money, there's a delicate line to walk. Understanding that sticker price doesn't often or always equate to actual cost. So not immediately writing off a school because of that sticker price, but also not encouraging something that is just totally unattainable or highly unlikely for a family to be able to afford. It's been said that you should never let a good crisis go to waste. And I would not describe the college application process as crisis, but I'm sure it can sometimes feel that way. And, there will be bumps along the road. And I just think it's a shame for a student to be so shielded and protected from all those twists and turns that they miss the chance to walk away with so many of these valuable lessons that there are to be gained. And as I wrap up, if you'll just kind of allow me one brief metaphor, which may or may not land, let them flex their muscles. They're on that bench press. They're lifting a heavy weight. So I encourage you to be their spotter. Don't be their arms. So encourage them to do the hard thing and to be there to make sure they get that weight back on the rack safely. We don't want them to drop it on their head, but it's okay if they sweat, if they grunt, if they're a little sore afterwards. It's really okay to witness the struggle and to be there to support them in the process. And one really great piece of news is you have excellent support at GHS. So I really encourage you to work in partnership with and not in conflict with your student school counselor. They can offer perspective that you may not have about the current state of college admission. So that's what I've got for now. Thanks, again for coming, and I really look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Lynn, and I absolutely love that metaphor. I might use that in future presentations. So I'll turn over here to Erica.
Thanks, Allison. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm talking a little bit about really the elements of the application process. And I'd like to start by indicating that the factors will vary by college and university, and it'll be really important as you think about this process to go to the website and interact with each of the colleges and universities you're really interested in to find out more about the things that they're including in their application process. Part of that will help you find out about whether or not it's a good match for you. There might be elements of the application that perhaps your thought is, I'm not really interested in that. And that might be something that might deter you from a particular institution because, again, that's a value set that the institution has, and maybe that doesn't align with something that you're interested in. The factors that are included in the application process, though the admissions office is responsible for the evaluation and review of that information, they often come from a value set related to the mission of the institution, input from faculty, and leadership at that institution. So it's not necessarily simply what's in the paper or what might be popular, but really at core what might be part of the mission of the institution that help to inform the information that they're requesting of you. As we think about those elements, starting with things like the academic preparation of a student, I always call that the base or the foundation. And I always think of these factors as really forming a picture of yourself as you're thinking of the application process. And that foundation starts with your grades, your courses, your test scores, if you have them available and are going to submit those to an institution and they do require a submission, or that you think it could lend something to your application process. The trend in academic performance. Those are all elements that we consider kind of the foundation. And some of those things leading into your senior year, we now will have 3 years of that information. So a trend, and that'll give us an idea of your academic performance, but it doesn't tell the whole picture. And so there are other elements that we consider to be elements that maybe tell us a little bit more about your personality, who you are, your individuality. And so that might be your teacher and counselor recommendation if a school requires it. And not all schools will require recommendation letters. So it's important to recognize that if that is the case, that as a sophomore or junior, as you're making really relationships or communicating with your teachers, that you're forming those relationships and finding out if they might be able to write a favorable letter of recommendation for you for that process. And the important part is favorable. Often the idea is some students will ask for a letter of recommendation, but they kind of run away before they've asked that question of, will it be favorable? And the reason that becomes important is in the process, most of us don't receive necessarily negative letters of recommendation for students. Now, we may receive very neutral letters often for students that maybe don't distinguish or differentiate students, but we don't usually receive negative letters of recommendation. So it's often important that as you're talking to that teacher, that you find out, do they have favorable things to say about you? And often that might be not necessarily the class where you've done your best work, meaning where you have the highest grade, but it might be the course where you've needed to show character, where you needed some additional assistance, where maybe it was overcoming adversity and you needed some additional time and attention, that they were really able to show the growth and really be able to see how your character developed in the class. And your counselor is also a component of this. And I think, as Lynn mentioned, really discussing, you have a wonderful counseling staff. And so really talking to them about the things you're most interested in, perhaps your own growth and development. Maybe you were a shy ninth grader and now as a blossoming junior, you're able to really see your own development. Often this junior year, having some self-reflection and sharing that with your counselor can be extremely helpful as they begin to think about how they might be able to put together that letter of recommendation if it's required for you for submission in your application. And then there are the essays. And I think students often think that we as institutions don't think about those questions as carefully as we do. Now, many of us are members of a group called the Common App, and there are over 700 institutions that accept the Common App. And so there's a list of questions that a student can select one from the Common App if the school intentionally requires it. And you submit that response to all of the schools that you complete the Common App for. But then there's something called supplements, and that's an area where each of us can basically list questions that we'd like you to respond to. And those are usually questions that, as I mentioned, may have input from faculty and administrative staff that really hone in on things that are very vital or valuable for that individual institution. And so we ask you that you pay a little bit more attention to those and try to make sure you answer those questions. And so I often encourage students to give yourself time and opportunity to write a rough draft, but also go back and make sure that you look at the institution where you might have interest to see how your answer aligns with what you might see as an area of interest at that institution, or what might be something that the institution wouldn't know about you. And this isn't necessarily something that would be surprising or shocking. That's not really what we're looking for. We are not looking to be shocked or thrilled. Really, we're looking for information that will tell us more about who you are, what you will contribute to our campus communities, and how we can help you accomplish your goals. That's really it. And that's really unique to each of you as individuals. There's also extracurricular activities, your involvement in your community, which could be inside or outside of the classroom, whether or not you have a part-time job, leadership, whether that's at home or at school or in your community, awards you might have received, and service opportunities. All of those things give us a well-rounded picture of who you are and what you value. And there isn't necessarily indictment of the value set, it's how you're spending your time. And that becomes vitally important as we know that you're practicing in high school for how you will spend your time in college. You may join different clubs and organizations, but we hope you'll get involved. And so you're practicing that in high school because unfortunately we won't necessarily at all of our institutions have the ability to monitor how you're balancing that work. And so this really becomes your ability to manage yourself, and your ability to practice that in high school be vitally important, especially for those of us who have larger campuses where, again, student self-management becomes really a part of your execution of your goals. As I head back to really thinking about your grades and rigor of curriculum, there's a story to be told about your progress. What happened throughout your 3 years prior to your senior year? Selecting courses in the areas where you do your best work at a more advanced level, if it's available, and you have a wonderful curriculum available at your school with AP courses that are available. But that doesn't mean every course, every hour in every subject area that you should be taking at advanced level. It's really challenging yourself in the areas where you have aptitude and interest, meaning as you've taken the courses, maybe you, as Lynn indicated, you need to struggle a little bit, you stretch, you groan, maybe you put in a little extra effort, but you are accomplished in those areas. And so that's the course that you take at the more advanced level. Where you might need some additional help, you seek it out. So that's important to recognize. We look at the grade trend. But we also look at that in the context of your school. So really important that as we look holistically at all the information you provide, we're trying to determine that, one, you can academically be successful at our institutions. If there's support that we should provide based upon your individual circumstances, background, and interests, that we have enough information available to reasonably make that assessment. And that's information you would share, but also in conjunction with what your counselor will share with us, and also what your teacher will share. I will say that the teacher and counselor recommendations help to support the information you've provided in the application. They do not make or break our application process. Now, there are some additional components that, based upon what you might be interested in, could be a component of the application: a portfolio, an audition, and for some schools, an interview. And for those institutions, we encourage students to actively seek out information about what they're looking for in each of those elements. And there's usually a guide to what should be submitted in the portfolio, or for the audition, or even for the interview. Is it an informational interview that really is more so about them trying to sell you on the institution, rather than you needing to go in and sell yourself to that institution? So we encourage students to take advantage of those opportunities, but also determine what you might share with the institution that they might not know about you that would help them make a favorable decision in the application. So as you think about this process overall, recognize our goal is to admit students that will be valuable, contributing members of our academic community, but also who are looking to grow and help our institutions grow as well. So I think that's where I'll end in terms of thinking of those elements of the application. But know that as you're heading into your senior year, or as you're thinking about really making choices your junior year, it's about your growth and develop in progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Okay, Vern, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Allison, and thanks, Michelle, and the GHS community for inviting me. And it's a pleasure being here. I always enjoy doing these type of presentations, whether they be virtual or in person, because they really, are the essence of the work that we do, and that is ultimately, helping students with the next phase of their life, which is entering college. Lynn, when you were talking earlier about your experience as a parent, I started laughing to myself, and a little bit about myself. We are the parents of a daughter who is now a sophomore in college. And so parents, first of all, let me just tell you that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, no matter how frustrating it might get sometimes. But, I just remember going through that whole process, and I can assure you that 95% of the stuff that you are telling parents, you will be telling your students. So you could feel good about that. But I want to talk to you about the process of putting your list together of colleges and universities. And, when you're thinking about it, whether you're sophomores, juniors, whenever you're, really starting to think about putting that list together, it could seem very, very daunting because, you've heard the stats, close to 4,000 colleges and universities just in the United States alone. That's not even including universities that are overseas that some of you may be considering. And so there just seems and feels like there is a lot out there. And the first thing that I think is important for you all to be thinking about is that I think the college search process, in this process of ultimately shaping your list of schools that you're ultimately applying for, if you do it right, it can be very, very reflective, because it ultimately allows you the opportunity to think about what are those things that matter most to you. And I think that is a very, very important aspect about the whole college search process and shaping your list of schools that you're ultimately going to be applying to. Thinking about those things that are important to you. I want to go back to something I said earlier about a parent and my experience going through the whole process. My first time taking my daughter out to a college visit, I remember us going to the schools, and I remember I was doing a lot of the talking and not letting her talk. And I remember getting in the car and we're heading home, and she was very quiet. And I was just asking her what's wrong. And she made a comment to me that you would not let me talk. You were doing all the talking. This is my college search. And it was probably one of the most profound things that she could have said to me in that moment, because it is a reminder to not only myself, but it's a reminder to parents as well, that it is your child's search, and you want to let them lead the way with you being there as a supporter. And a part of that is trying to help them identify a good fit. And the importance of fit is something that is an important aspect in the whole college search process. When Erica was talking about the application components and all those things, one of the things that she mentioned was about the diversity of different ways that colleges will, have their processes and go through that whole process. And the same thing holds true for the things that are going to be important to students when it comes to fit. For some students, that fit is around the size of the school. So there are some students who the thought of going to a university the size of mine may be very intimidating, but others it may be something that's going to be great for them. And so thinking about that, where the school is located is something else that can play a part in determining the fit. The distance, how far away it is, that location. Again, I think those things are very, very important. What programs are at that university are going to be some of the things that help to determine the fit of the institution to the student. The campus environment is something that should not be understated as far as the importance in helping a student to think about the fit of the institution and how that institution is ultimately going to resonate with them and ultimately be a place that they can ultimately be successful with. And so, really thinking about the fit of the institution, and that's going to be a part in helping students in when they're ultimately putting that list of universities together, that they're ultimately going to be considering researching for ultimately attendance at those universities. When folks are thinking about universities, sometimes it feels like there are only 10, 20 universities out there, because there are certain universities that really drive the narrative, that drive the conversation about universities out there. But as I mentioned earlier, there are literally thousands of universities in the United States and even more outside of the United States that are out there. And the point I'm trying to make out there is that there are institutions that you may not have thought about because you don't see them on TV, or they may not be in the top 10 of the rankings that are out there. That, going back to that fit piece, are going to be wonderful fits for you, and are going to be institutions that are going to help you ultimately get to the outcomes that you ultimately want to achieve. And so, that comes from thinking about this, being open-minded about the whole process, and not just, again, relying on information that may not be thought out, that may not be applicable to you. So having a really open mind about it and doing your research. As you've heard from both the other panelists, you all have tremendous resources at GHS and encourage you to take advantage of those resources. But there are so many other great resources out there that you can go to learn more about colleges and do your research. Now, back in my day, when I was going through the whole college search process, I would go into the guidance office and there would be a big binder that had all of the schools and colleges and universities out there, and I would have to go through page by page and get that information. And you don't have to do those things to get the information that you need. And there's so much information at your fingertips that I would absolutely encourage you to think about as you're going to research these different universities and trying to figure out what are the things that are important for you. One site that I like talking to students about is a site called Big Future. They have wonderful search engines, and they allow you to groups universities based on some of those fit characteristics that I talked about. So really thinking about that as you are trying to identify those universities that ultimately could be the best fit, and so those universities that you may not even be thinking about. You want to challenge your assumptions, what you're thinking about universities out there, because again, after you do your research, you may realize that this is a university that actually is perfect for me based on the things that matter most to me. So keeping an open mind and don't limiting your search. This is the part of the process where you want to try to have as diverse a list of schools as possible as you start to whittle that list down to ultimately the ones that you're going to be applying to, and then ultimately the ones that you're going to be deciding on. So, thinking about how to have that list as broad as possible starting off. But then there is going to come a point where you are going to have to manage that list, and you're going to have to bring it down to a much more manageable size. And the reason I say that is that you're thinking about it. You want to have a lot of schools to think about starting off, but the more schools you have on your list for a longer period of time, that just means that that's just that many more schools, that when it's really time for you to decide what university you're going to enroll in, that you have not spent the amount of time that is, I think, important in researching your institutions. So ultimately trying to get that list down to a manageable number as you enter your senior year and you start to think about the number of schools that you're going to be applying to. And I think I don't think there's a perfect answer. I would say that 50 is not a good answer. So I can say that you definitely don't want to have 50, but somewhere in that 10, 12 number as you are entering your senior year, I think is a good manageable number for you to be thinking about as those schools that you're really, really going to be focusing your attention on and really thinking about, is this a place that I could see myself in? As you're putting that manageable list down, I think you need to start thinking about things as far as the selection process, a number of those things that Erica talked about, and specifically things like selectivity of the university, or even things that you may not even be thinking about, the selectivity of majors, because there are some programs at different universities that may be more selective than others. And so as a part of that process, you want to be compiling your list of schools, and you've heard some folks talk about it. You want to have some schools that are safety schools, or those schools that are those target from a selectivity and a competitiveness from admissions in those reach schools. And so I think that there is a piece of that I think is important, but I would say that you should not have that all be the only driver in that, because ultimately you want to try to find universities that are going to be fits with you. So I think there's a blending of those things when you're ultimately coming up with, when you're considering the selectivity and how that plays in the compiling of your list of schools. And then the final thing I just want to share on this topic before we go ahead and open it up to questions, and it goes back to the school that you all are at, GHS, and Greenwich High School is just an amazing school in so many ways. But one of the great ways that's going to benefit you are the great resources that they have to help you answer a lot of these questions about the whole college search process. I can say this from experience, that the professional conferences that are prevalent in our field, where we gather and we're sharing ideas and we're learning about different trends, that the staff at GHS are working with us and are having conversations with us, and so they have familiarity with a wide array of universities out there. So utilizing those resources that they have in conversations, but utilizing the resources that they have that can help identify those fits, that can give you information about the selectivity of the universities that you may be considering, that all go in that whole process of you shaping your list down to those universities that you're ultimately going to consider. So I'll stop right there and turn it back over to Allison.
Okay, thank you, Vern. So we did have a number of questions that were presented to us in advance, but feel free to use the Q&A to add additional questions. But Vern, I'd actually love to start with you just to kind of piggyback off your last comment. We had a couple questions about whether or not you would recommend hiring a private consultant to help manage this process. So seems to be a growing interest in paying for outside consultants, and I think it's important to have that kind of open conversation. Maybe can you talk about, is that something you recommend? Or
Yeah, it's a question, great question. And I know we get it on the university side when we're talking to parents and they ask us their thoughts on that. I would say I would go back to something that I said at the end of my my opening, in that you as students and parents, your students and guardians and those folks who are working with the students, you have wonderful resources at GHS that I don't think should be ignored, and I think they can play a great role in helping put students in the right pathway. And so I would say, generally speaking, particularly at a school like GHS, I feel between the resources in the counseling office that you all offer, not only in the conversations, but the tools, the data tools that you're able to provide students to give them more information and more fine-tuned information. So between those things, between the different search engines that I've mentioned and the resources that are out there to learn more about the universities, both the general ones, but also virtually as well. I would say that your students are going to be able to get the information that they need in order to help make them make an informed decision about putting their list together and ultimately deciding on the colleges that they're going to apply to and ultimately enroll at. But as with a lot of things, it is an individual decision, and families have to have those conversations amongst themselves and think about, is there a unique situation where, I feel that my child needs to get some more personalized information to help them make that decision. So again, generally speaking, I feel very, very confident in saying with 100% that the resources at GHS, both in the staff as well as the tools that you're able to provide, will allow your students to make an informed decision. But again, these things are individual decisions and family decisions. And so, I always want to add that piece of it in the whole conversation.
excellent. Thank you, Vern. So we do have a number of questions around the difference between early decision and early action. So I know Holy Cross offers both early decision 1 and 2. UConn now offers early decision for the first time this year. And Michigan does not offer early decision, only early action. So maybe we could start with Erica. Do you mind talking about maybe the benefits of applying early action? Does it matter if students apply early action versus regular? Any advantage?
So early action is really a non-binding way that students can apply to an institution by a deadline, and we basically indicate that we will guarantee a decision to students by a deadline as well, so a specific decision release date. But again, it's not binding. I think for Michigan, our volume of students who apply in early action is much larger than in regular. So 2/3 of our applicants apply during the fall of their senior year. And so that means we receive about 60,000 applications or just over that for our early action deadline. That can feel like for students who have very high interest that even though they're not admitted in early, that somehow means they won't be accepted to the institution. When for us, it really means that we may have interest in that student, but I may not have enough information about my overall applicant pool. And that means that we have a regular decision process that also has a deadline, and that's February 1st, and we release decisions by the end of March. And so students who apply in early action who aren't admitted are considered in that regular round as well. So they get both considerations in that process, but a student who applies early, the advantage there is that if there's a need to look at fall grades, or if there's a course that they haven't taken that's for a particular area of academic interest, for instance, engineering, and they don't have, let's say, physics, we might reach out to that student, and in early we could say, hey, we really would encourage you to add that course because it will strengthen your application. When a student applies in regular, unfortunately, the timing just doesn't allow for those changes in the application.
Excellent. Thank you, Erica.
Mhm.
And I guess, Lynn, maybe you might want to open up the early decision conversation, just because early decision's been around for a while at Holy Cross. And
Sure. Yeah.
I think just also recognizing we have some families that may not know what early decision is. So maybe just a brief little introduction.
Sure. So early decision is a binding application round, meaning that when a student applies early decision to an institution, they are signing on the dotted line, acknowledging that if they are admitted, they will plan to enroll at that college or university. So there's a commitment there. So a student applying ED, first of all, you would only apply early decision to one institution. You can have at Holy Cross, you can have other early applications out there. So you could apply early action elsewhere. But the expectation is if you are admitted through early decision, you at that point withdraw any other offers of admission. The benefit for students with early decision, if they have truly identified a number one choice college or university, and I'll keep saying college, I'll represent the college side here. If you've truly identified that number one choice college and you feel like you've done the financial homework to understand that this is an affordable option for your family, the benefit is that you've found your number one, and if you are admitted, in our case, in the middle of December, a student admitted early decision now knows where they will be enrolling in college the following fall. They are super excited. They go into their winter break with a sense of ease. They're able to celebrate. They delete all of those in-progress supplements. They save some money on some additional application fees. So there's certainly a nice aspect for students to wrap up the process a little bit earlier and to really know that they have now made a commitment to attend their number one choice institution. The only difference for us with early decision too is the timeline. So that application deadline is later. And in all frankness, many applicants in ED2 pools are often students who were in an ED pool somewhere, and perhaps that didn't work out. And ED2 sometimes offers the opportunity for a student to look at that number two choice school that now has sort of moved into the number one slot. So ED2 also carries that binding piece. And I will just acknowledge, because financial aid is a concern across the spectrum for families, regardless of income, that we at Holy Cross and many of our peers are really sensitive to that. And while we absolutely expect families to go into early decision in good faith and with the expectation that they will enroll if admitted, we have conversations with families about financial aid before, during, and after early decision. And there are very rare cases. There are cases very occasionally where something just doesn't align and we cannot make the financial aid work for what a family truly needs, despite the fact that we meet need. And we are willing to release families from that commitment. So it's something to be aware of, that there is that little opportunity when something truly doesn't work out. But again, it is very few and far between. So just be aware that, you'd want to do your financial homework before you make that ED commitment.
I know, Vern, do you want to add to that? I know this will be your first year in ED.
Yeah, this is gonna be our first year. For years we had one application deadline, and we just heard from families wanting to have an earlier deadline, and we were going back and forth between early action, early decision. We made the decision to go to early decision for a number of reasons. One of those being that um, we wanted to make sure that we had that strong commitment to the holistic review, and with the limited number of readers that we have, I mean, we have a good number of them, but with the volume of applications that we have overall, we just made the decision that we were going to go to early decision. We want to be able to continue with the same application review process that we have, with the staffing resources that we had. And we want to again focus the early application process on those folks who are ready to make that commitment to the University of Connecticut. So, so a lot of the things that Lynn said, I would echo, but just a little window into our thought process to why we made the decision to add early decision.
And just one other quick follow-up question there for you, Vern. So some schools fill 50% plus of their class through early decision. Being a public institution,
Yeah.
are you looking to fill that much of your class through ED, or?
Yeah, so we have not put a hard goal in place as far as what we're looking to fill. It certainly would not be in the 50% range where you see a number of universities. It really was the big reason was really wanting to have an earlier application deadline for students to be able to apply for admissions. Something else that I think is important for folks to think about with our early decision as a part of our package. When we release our early decision offers in mid-December, it's not going to come with a financial aid package, and so that's where we want our students to understand what it really means to apply early decision at the University of Connecticut. And so we know right there that's going to limit the applicant pool right there. And that combination with the fact that we are the flagship, we are a land grant. We were also thinking about, we did not want to have a process that was going to overcommit to students. To certain students in our applicant pool. So we wanted to make sure that we provided the opportunities for the entire applicant pool for full consideration, whether it be for scholarships or honors programs or special programs that we have.
Okay, great. Thanks, Vern. We also have a number of questions around navigating the test optional landscape that we're currently in. So all of you are still test optional. And I know as counselors, we field multiple questions on a daily basis about how important is testing? Does it matter if I, keep retaking prep classes? How much will it impact my application? I don't know if each of you may want to just touch upon, how important testing is and any advice that you may have for students as they navigate that piece. Anybody want to go first?
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and just start off with, I would say that I mean, testing is a part of the university, the college experience that, when you're a student at a university, you're going to be taking tests. And so there's no getting around that. I think when we made the decision to go test optional, and we, like a number of universities, right around when COVID came and the limitations in accessing exams, we made that decision to go test optional. But we were actually thinking about test optional before that, and we had started to do research, and we were able to see just in our preliminary data that for about 80% of the students in our applicant pool, the score that they got on the test, they were just as likely to have in their first year performance above a 3.0 as they would below a 3.0 in their first year performance by way of their test score. So for us, that provided us with the opportunity to move forward with the test optional pilot that we are currently currently under in our application review process. I think tests are, if a student submits a test score, it is going to be something that is going to be evaluated in the application review process. But I think one of the things that test optional can hopefully remind students of is that tests are not the only thing that comprise an admissions decision. There are many other things that are a part of the holistic review process. And so if a student feels that that test is an accurate reflection of their ability or potential, then they have the opportunity to submit it. But if a student does not feel that, then they have the opportunity to not submit it and get full consideration in the application review process. So just starting off, that I'll just add that piece to the whole conversation around test optional.
Anybody else want to chime in?
I think I'll just add, really with the information that Vern shared is very similar to Michigan. I co-chaired about a year ago the reevaluation of our policy on our campus with a faculty member from our School of Education. And what we found, very similarly to what Vern was indicating, we just at this point didn't have enough information for us to say, let's return to requiring test scores. What we found was that we didn't see any marked difference in students' performance on campus. What we did see was an expanded opportunity for students who considered the university and submitted applications, who in the past, even though we talked about considering applications within the context of their high school environment, context of curriculum holistically, they just didn't apply to the university. And so we really saw the benefits. However, at this point, we'll continue with the study, which really looks at the 4-year achievement of students and really the retention of students within specific majors. So where we know nationally there's some concern about math preparation and reading comprehension, we'll have more information that we'll be gathering in the next couple of years, and we'll reassess. We also are concerned about pipeline to specific areas of academic interest and fields of study where testing is required for licensure. And so this national perspective of students who may think that, gosh, I shouldn't sit for examinations is very different. I don't think that's what's going on at your high school, but there are populations of students that with this policy, and for some of our institutions thinking, what is that doing in terms of cultivating and building a qualified candidate pool of students who will go on to industry in those areas around our state and around the country, become part of what we think of, at least as public universities, flagships about the kinds of policies we think about. So that's on the docket of reviewing as it relates to testing policies. But at this point, what we've really determined is not to change the policy because we don't have enough information that is really indicating that there's a widening gap in student achievement on campus.
And I'll just add briefly, Holy Cross has been test optional since 2005. So we're not in any kind of pilot. It's just our long-standing policy. And for us, when scores are present, it's a piece of the puzzle. It doesn't suddenly become the one and only thing that we're looking at or considering. When they're not there, that's just not part of the puzzle. So it's not something that we're talking about in its absence.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. So we have another question around selectivity of certain majors. As a lot of students will say, is it better to apply to a less selective major and then transfer in once I get to the college? And then there are also a lot of students that don't, I think, understand the selectivity of certain majors. Business is growing in popularity. So, I know some of you factor that in, others maybe not as much. So a couple of you could comment on that.
So I can go first as it relates to Michigan. So this year, our business school has a direct entry program. In the past, students had to be admitted to our liberal arts program, and then they were considered for Ross once they were admitted to the university. The real decision there was really around students aligning with, for the students who were very much set on, if I come to the university, I want to major in business. And the notion that if a student really has their heart set on that major, and their interest in Michigan is really about a BBA, so that Bachelor of Business Administration, and we're not going to have the ability to meet that capacity or that demand, is if they're not admitted at the first year level, then they probably are wanting to seek enrollment elsewhere. And so this is really aligning with, are they a good fit? And so to some extent, the application now is focused not only on the academic preparedness, but also the students demonstrated potential and also how much they've really explored their interest in business. And so that's going to be articulated through our portfolio process. So for students who are narrowly focused, whether that's engineering or business, or it could be nursing, the idea of this entry and specifically going directly into major means that the student isn't necessarily interested in the broad exploration of the liberal arts college. And so again, this does mean that the student is saying, first, I want to go to business or nursing, whether it's at Michigan or some other institution. And so the goal is really to help students follow their pathway that they've determined is where they'd like to be, rather than we broadly admit you to the liberal arts college with the hope that you would end up in the College of Engineering or in the business school. And we know that that pathway may not be there because there's already a set cohort of students that are there with limited capacity to meet that expectation. So it really has to be, is the institutional fit first, or is it the major? And if it's the major, then really working with your school counselor to determine fit with that institution and what you might be able to demonstrate or provide in the application that will align with whether or not it's a great school for you to apply to.
And I don't know if you wanted to make a comment just because Holy Cross is a smaller school and how you handle selectivity of certain majors.
Yeah, so it doesn't really apply in our case because all of our students come in undeclared. So we don't admit students to any particular major or program.
I think one of the other questions is, how can admission counselors at colleges be used as resources for students as they're going through the admissions process? Just kind of piggybacking off the major question, I mean, that's a question that I always tell students to ask admissions directly is, how selective is nursing, for example, or engineering? How many students are admitted? What is the admit rate? Can I be accepted into a second choice major? But I feel like all of your, valuable resources and speaking to the expert is always best. But just, curious kind of questions that you might get from students and how you feel like students should best access you as admission counselors.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and say, I mean, I think that is great advice, Allison. And one of the things that, I like to joke with students and families about is that, we work for the admissions office. We don't work for the deny office. And what I mean by that is that we are here to serve as resources to help students make the most informed decision possible. And so our admissions counselor, our admissions staff are there to answer questions that families have about our process. Now, none of us are going to be able to, the three of us are not going to be able to say that if you have this, you're going to be guaranteed admissions, because we all go through that holistic review where we are considering many different things in the selection process. What we can talk about are the things that make up our process, the components of it. For example, at a school like at UConn, you know, we are competitive overall, selective overall as far as admissions. But major really is more of a secondary review, and so the student is considered for admission first. And once they meet that, They're either admitted into the program they put down or they're admitted into our undecided program, but they're admitted to the university. But again, universities do those things differently and they have different processes. And that's where it's important for your students and their families to understand, to not hesitate to reach out to us to ask those questions, or go to our websites. I mean, we want to again make sure that students have the most information possible to help them make that decision about, is this university right for me, or how competitive am I going to be in the whole admissions process.
Thank you.
Can I just add something to that?
Yeah, definitely.
It's not about a specific question for a student to ask me, but I'm thinking about your college fair, which I think is coming up next, later this month. And, what I find really useful in my interactions with student is, first of all, when they're honest. So if a student is walking up to the table and they really just need a minute, I just want to look at this brochure for a minute, or I'm not going to have questions, but I just want to look at this, or can I just take this home and look at it? So recognizing that, we will greet you and it's our job to sort of like try to engage you, but you can be honest about sort of how you want to interact. And I think also it really is helpful when a student sort of sets the stage or gives some context. So if I'm talking to a student who is a junior, they've never heard of Holy Cross ever, they've never heard of it, versus I'm talking to a student who's already submitted their application and was on campus yesterday. It's not that I like one of those students or want to interact with one of those students more than the other, but I would speak to them differently. I would approach the conversation differently. So I think that can be a really nice way to approach an admission officer at a college fair elsewhere. It doesn't just have to be, can you tell me about your English major? It is, it can be, hi, this is who I am, and this is sort of where I am in relation to my college search, or I don't know anything about your school, or I'm really excited about X, Y, or Z. So I think that can be really helpful. So we're not just sort of churning out the same information to all students, and it doesn't necessarily apply equally.
I love that. And thank you for bringing up our college fair. It is actually next Thursday evening from 6 to 8 p.m. We have almost 200 schools that are coming. It can be a very crowded evening, a little overwhelming, especially for our sophomores, and occasionally we might have a freshman there. So I think just mentioning what grade you are is also helpful, like if you are just starting the process. So that's great advice. So we have a few other questions, or well, we probably only have time for a couple more here, but a few questions about recommendation letters. Do you typically like to see recommendation letters mostly for junior year, or can you ask a freshman or sophomore teacher? Discipline, if I want to major in engineering, is it important to have a physics or math teacher? I don't know if anybody wants to take that.
I'll jump in. For letters of recommendation, again, as I mentioned, someone who can speak to your aptitude, potential, interest, and your development is really key. You're applying to college, and the thought is going back to ninth grade, unfortunately, doesn't necessarily speak to who you are as a junior or even going into your senior year of high school. And so we'd hope that you're connecting with one of your teachers your junior year. Looking at the information for an institution regarding whether or not they're looking for a subject-specific letter of recommendation, and there could be institutions that very clearly indicate you're interested in engineering, we'd like to see a letter of recommendation from a math or a science teacher. If not, then we would encourage you to, really talk to the teacher about someone who can, again, speak to potential, speak to your aptitude, speak to your interests and your development. And that really is about the subject matter. The council recommendation is talking about your overall development as a person while you've been in high school. And so really thinking of that duality of who can provide that information. You could have a teacher who also is the sponsor for one of the clubs you're involved in. And so again, that development, how you solve problems, how you work with others, might be information that you would share or ask them to share in their letter. So I think it's important to recognize that, leading into your senior year, because again, the process, our deadlines are usually in the fall of your senior year. So looking to a teacher that you're working with your senior is probably a little too late. But really that junior year, trying to scope it out and have a couple of teachers in mind, have a primary and a backup. So if your primary doesn't get it in, you got somebody you can go to. Don't tell your primary you have the backup, but you need to have the backup on deck. Go go to that primary, maybe with your, their favorite candy, whatever it might be, and thank them after the week. And then if they have this panic look like they haven't submitted it, then, still give them the treat and then go to your backup like, hey, I'm going to get the second letter just in case. Don't tell them they're the second, but get that letter in because, again, for your benefit, it really is trying to get it off the plate. I will say some colleges, that some of your teachers might wait until you submit your information, recognizing that until you do your part, they don't want to do theirs. You might not follow through. So they're trying to manage their work. So you be on top of your things, getting your application submitted so that they can get theirs done earlier. The earlier, the better. And waiting the week before our deadlines just means they're getting inundated as well. So it means they get a little behind. So the earlier you can get the jump on your application, that August, early September, maybe helping your teachers, give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt to try to get in the early round rather than right at the November 1st deadline or whatever the deadline for your universities might be.
Yeah, I do get that question a lot, which came up with a senior parent here is, should I wait to submit my application until the letters are received? And, it's real, when you're finished and you feel good about your application, you click submit.
That's right.
The letters and the transcript will connect in
Follow.
the cloud when it all comes together. But definitely don't wait.
It does. We have extensive processes to manage that.
And then just lastly, in terms of recommendations that I just wanted to add is that one of the things I always recommend students spend a lot of time doing is completing, we have a teacher recommendation questionnaire that really helps teachers to write better letters. It's not required, but it can make their life a little easier and again, can make for a stronger letter. And then for the counselor recommendation, we have a very extensive brag packet that parents complete and the student, but again, it helps counselors, get to know you more and, talk about you as a whole person. So being detailed, using anecdotes on those questionnaires can be really beneficial in the letter writing process. So I think we're about up. I promised all of you I would get you out of here by 7:30 on a Tuesday evening. So I just wanted to close by, again, mentioning college night is next Thursday. And then for our junior families, we have our big college kickoff event in early December, where we really get into more like the nuts and bolts of the admissions process. So we have a series of evening events that happen throughout the year for different grade levels. But this is honestly always my favorite event of the year, just kind of kicking off the fall, and really appreciate all of you taking time out of your evenings to be here with us tonight. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to let everybody close out, and everybody have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm sorry my camera's not working. It was great. We've learned so much information. We're very appreciative.
All right. Thank you all. Have a good night.